This is on how to participate in the California budget process. Now, before we discuss specifics of participation in the budget process here in the state of California, we need to understand some of the basics of the budget process. First, where do we find the rules governing the budget process? As you can imagine, first and foremost, the California Constitution in Article 4, followed by provisions of the government code, and then a few of the legislature's own internal rules. The budget process, like the broader legislative process, is also dependent upon the calendar and the specified deadlines in the joint rules. Now, some, if not most of the rules are in the Constitution, a handful in the government code. For example, two major budget dates are found in the Constitution. January 10th, which is the deadline for the governor to introduce his or her budget proposal, and June 15th, of course, the deadline for the legislature to pass the budget. Two additional key budget dates are found actually in the government code. May the 14th, the deadline for the May budget revision to be submitted by the Department of Finance, and July 1st, the start of the state's fiscal year. The state budget process on paper is similar to the legislative process. However, it is different in practical terms. The full budget committees of both the Senate and the Assembly act mostly as the final arbiter of their respective houses when it comes to finalizing the actions of the budget subcommittees. And obviously, the legislative leaders can and do impact the final budget decisions. But the budget bill is rarely modified on either floor of the legislature. Instead, the five Senate budget subcommittees and the seven Assembly budget subcommittees act as both policy and fiscal committees in determining budget actions. Once the governor's budget proposal is released by January the 10th, both budget committee staff prepare a summary overview of the governor's budget, and a similar document is prepared by the LAO, the Legislative Analyst Office. In early March, if not even in February, the Assembly and Senate subcommittees begin holding hearings and taking testimony from the Department of Finance, the LAO, the respective state agencies and departments, and of course, members of the public. This is a critical time to advocate for your interests or those of your client on specific budget requests. Most of the work on the budget occurs at the subcommittee level. And prior to these hearings, the budget committee staff members examine the budget proposals and they prepare agendas that include, of course, an explanation of the governor's budget, the proposals that he's made, and the staff's recommendations, whether to accept, modify, hold open, or reject a specific budget proposal made in the governor's Jan 10 budget. Many of the governor's budget proposals are held open for further discussions and a vote, which most often occurs after the May revise has been released. The minority party staff prepare similar information for their members of those budget subcommittees. By the time the governor's May revise is released in mid-May, after the April tax receipts are generally known, the subcommittees must quickly conclude their deliberations within 2 or 3 weeks at most. As such, it's hard for the public to have much more input unless there's an entirely new budget proposal. Therefore, it is important that communication be done early in the budget process. Although the public budget process is usually just over 5 months in length, the development of the state budget begins shortly after the prior version takes effect. California's fiscal year again begins on July 1st and, of course, runs through the following June 30th. By way of comparison, just note that the federal government's fiscal year runs October 1st through September 30th. State departments, of course, are required to submit budget proposals to their respective agencies, who in turn submit their proposals to the Department of Finance. This occurs in the early fall, and after the Department of Finance makes its recommendations, the governor and his staff will make final determinations in consultation with DOF in time for release of the governor's budget by the January 10th deadline. The governor's budget is on the DOF website under the e-budget tab. The budget is roughly 1,300 pages in length and, of course, contains the details of the governor's proposed budget spending for the upcoming fiscal year. Each budget item is assigned a 10-digit code and includes the State Department purpose and funding source. In turning to how to best participate in that state budget process, it is similar in many ways to your possible participation in the legislative process. While the budget process has its own terminology and a concurrent process in the legislature, it's still important to understand the procedural rules, the players in this process, and of course, the policy areas within the budget process. And never forget the two key players beyond the governor and legislature, and that's the Department of Finance, the governor's fiscal advisor, and the Legislative Analyst Office, the legislature's fiscal advisor. The staff of both DOF and LAO play a critical role in the development and analysis of the California state budget, the budget bills junior and trailer bills. You should consult with their staff about budget proposals that you support or that you oppose. Probably the best place to participate in the budget process, of course, is at the subcommittee level and the public hearing. Before each hearing, subcommittee staff prepare extensive agendas for the hearings that detail the governor's proposals and alternatives. The agendas are available to anyone on the committee website. During these subcommittee hearings, the legislature has its broadest discussion of budget alternatives and are likely to make changes to the original budget proposal from the administration. State agencies, the governor's DOF, the LAO, again, all appear before these subcommittees, arguing for their respective points of view, and interested parties can also appear before the subcommittees. But prior to these public hearings, meet with the Budget Committee staff, the Department of Finance, and LAO, again, about your provisions that you are supporting or you're opposing. Just like in the legislative process, the best way to participate in the budget process is also to communicate with those decision makers. Early communication, of course, is key. And if you're concerned with specific budget issues, it's incumbent upon you or your organization to let legislators and their staff know. In that regard, of course, you can call or write your legislator. You can also testify in budget subcommittees. After those subcommittee hearings, there's limited public opportunities. One remaining opportunity is at the full budget committee hearing, but usually testimony is held at the very end with perhaps a minute per individual. And after that, there are no further public hearings. So again, the best time to participate in California's budget process is at the subcommittee level.